Welcome back to Every Third House by Margery Frisbie. Chapter 6. Tracy's chance to ask a doctor if she'd ever think she was being poisoned came the next day. While she'd been eating her liver and onions the night before, she'd asked her grandmother when she could visit her mother. It had been more than a week since Tracy had seen her. "Well, why can't I?" Tracy had complained. "The doctor said a week." That's true. Her grandmother had been spooning extra fried onions onto Grandpa's plate. She offered around the blueberry muffins Tracy had located in the freezer before she added, "But Dr. McIntosh has changed her mind." "Then I can't see Mum." "I didn't say that." Tracy felt as if every bite she had eaten was going to surge right back up. What was the use? She gritted her teeth against her anger. What was the use? Grandma poured another cup of tea for Grandpa. She filled her own cup half full and added hot water. "Grandpa likes his tea strong," she said in explanation, as if Tracy had questioned his preference, or cared. "I know," Tracy said, thinking she'd heard that 10 times. "When can I go and see her?" "Dr. McIntosh thinks she'd like to talk to you alone first. I've already talked to her." "Alone? What have I got to say to her?" Tracy wanted the doctor to tell her about her mother. She didn't have anything to tell the doctor. "I don't know, Tracy. The sorts of things she asked me were about Dorothy's life when she was little. But you wouldn't know anything about that. I don't know what she'll ask you. Maybe she just wants to tell you something. You'll have to see." Across from Dr. McIntosh now, Tracy didn't feel comfortable enough to put her questions about being poisoned. It seemed silly in this no-nonsense, efficient office. Tracy found herself comparing it to Mrs. Emery's office, where it was comfortable to talk. Here everything had a hard surface, taut naugahyde upholstery in yellowish beige, a desk that gleamed with hard plastic insistence. There wasn't even a window showing some of the green beginning to pop up outdoors. Actually, there was no time for Tracy to ask questions anyway. Dr. McIntosh was talking. It seemed it was she who would ask the questions. Easy ones. Tracy slowly relaxed as she told Dr. McIntosh how old she was, where she went to school, and what she hoped to major in, and how the basketball team was doing. She was totally unprepared when Dr. McIntosh softly inquired what bothered Tracy most about her mother's illness. Tracy didn't stop to consider. She didn't wonder what the doctor would make of her answer. "Whether I'm going to get it," she blurted out. She couldn't believe she'd said the words. They sounded so bald, so selfish. They hung in that plastic room like plastic hailstones, unable to fall to the ground. Dr. McIntosh sat quietly. Finally, Tracy managed to say, "I can't believe I said that." "Why ever not, Tracy?" Dr. McIntosh's voice was warm enough to melt the hailstones. "Because it's not what I meant. What I really want to know, the reason I came here, the whole thing that bugs me all the time is, when's my mum going to be all right? That's what really bothers me most." "Then why do you think you didn't say that first?" Dr. McIntosh was still warm and friendly, but also quietly insistent. "I guess because I've wondered," Tracy admitted. "It's pretty scary when your mother changes right in front of you. She wasn't always this way." "This way?" Dr. McIntosh's tone was lightly inquiring. "Well, you know, staying in bed all the time, never fixing anything to eat, and then..." Tracy found herself remembering the morning she'd made up her mind that if her mother wasn't going to fix Tracy any breakfast, then Tracy would fix her mother's breakfast. She hadn't done anything fancy. No bud vases with yellow tea roses, or embroidered napkins, or buttered scones. She'd made 2 pieces of whole wheat toast, 2 glasses of orange juice, and 2 soft-boiled eggs. About as standard a breakfast for 2 as she could imagine. Tracy had made her mother get out of bed, put on a robe and slippers, and come out to the kitchen. She had teased her into it. "Come on, Mum. You can do it. You've got to eat something. I got up early to make it for you." But the strategy hadn't worked. Instead of sitting down across from Tracy and spooning her egg onto her toast the way she would have done 6 months ago, Mrs. Jenner stared at the egg until it got cold. Tracy felt her own breakfast congeal in her throat as she swallowed, as if the tube had got smaller and her usual-sized bites were overcrowding the passageway. Still, she wasn't at all prepared for her mother's next move. Mrs. Jenner, giving Tracy a "I know what you're up to" look, picked up her egg cup, walked to the waste can and pushed the egg into the bag with her napkin. Then she deliberately put more water on to boil. Tracy couldn't believe her eyes. She knew the egg wasn't cold when her mother sat down because hers had tasted just fine. If her mother wasn't worrying about the egg being cold, what was she worrying about? And what did that look mean? It had been time for Tracy to leave for school, but she sat there, mesmerised like a cobra before a snake charmer. She, watching in fascination as her mother lowered another egg into the boiling water, took a fresh slice of bread and placed it carefully in the toaster. Over the breakfast she'd made for herself, she gave Tracy a "I foiled your plot" look. Tracy was pulled back into the present by Dr. McIntosh's gentle prodding. "And then?" she was saying. "And then?" Tracy repeated, questioningly. "You were saying your mother stayed in bed all the time and stopped fixing meals." "Yes," Tracy resumed. "It wasn't too bad until she acted like I was poisoning her. That's when I knew something had to be done, and I called my grandmother. And she came. Right away." Tracy remembered how grateful she'd been to see her grandmother's sturdy figure emerge from her little car. "And then she called Dr. Rothstein, and he told her to call you. I was lucky to have her." "I think you should know, Tracy, that your mother's symptoms are not that unusual," Dr. McIntosh said. "That's what Mrs. Emery said." "Mrs. Emery?" "My counsellor at school." "Oh, I'm glad you're talking to someone." Tracy was suddenly more relaxed. "We've been talking about Mary Lincoln." Tracy waited for Dr. McIntosh to comment, but she didn't. She sat quietly, listening, lightly tapping a pencil against the desktop. The light rhythm was somehow calming, too. "She had some of the same problems my mother had. She lost 3 sons. She lost her husband. And she was..." The words were too hard to say. "Tracy." Dr. McIntosh leaned across the desk. The pencil was quiet now. Dr. McIntosh was taut, like a bow pulled back to launch an arrow. "Tracy, you are starting to answer your own question. You are wondering what caused your mother to become disoriented. But deep down you know. It is true, they're doing a lot of research on it now. They're finding that some people carry genes that make it more likely they will have emotional problems. Most often," Dr. McIntosh went on, "people need something in their lives to trigger the reaction. It takes an underlying susceptibility and the trigger." "Does my mother have these genes? Do I?" "We aren't far enough along to know exactly," Dr. McIntosh measured her words. "What we do know is your mother suffered enough trauma to account for the fact that she is currently somewhat disoriented. It takes years for a person to pick up the pieces after losing a child. Your mother lost her husband before she could get herself together. No wonder she retreated from reality. It was too harsh." Dr. McIntosh leaned back now in the plastic swivel chair. She toyed with the pencil again. "That reality has been tough on you too, Tracy." Tracy nodded. "Your mother is anxious about you. Should I tell her that you're getting along all right?" Tracy nodded again. "I'm all right, but when do I get to see her? Grandma said you told her a week." Dr. McIntosh stood up and came round the desk. Tracy thought she was going to pat her head. Instead, she shook her head, saying, "I'd like to see you once more first. But not here. They're almost finished with my office. I think it would be easier to talk there. How about the day after tomorrow? And then you can see your mother at the same time?" "And what about Grandma?" "That can come later. You're the one your mother wants to see first." It would be easier if Grandma came with, Tracy thought, but at least I can see how my mother is. "What I don't know is how I'll be," Tracy admitted to herself as she walked down the corridor, away from the plastic office and into more days of waiting and wondering. Until next time, good night.